Keith Levenberg was on yesterday, and we had a great discussion. We just ran out of time. We really wanted to get to the Charlie Gard story from Britain, and I'm bringing him back right now so we can talk about that and whatever else we have for time to do later today. But Keith, what's going on?
Hi, thanks for having me on again.
Always great. So your thoughts on Charlie Gard, and give a little background for people first.
Yeah, I really wanted to talk about this because I think it's one of those stories that's a lot bigger than just the story and the people involved. It's one of those things that really gets to the heart of just so many things that are going wrong in the world right now. Mm-hmm. Charlie, of course, is the child, little baby, I guess about a year old by now, who has a very severe condition in Britain, who's been denied access to experimental treatment that would be available to him in the United States, that's been offered to him.
Let's just mention how bad it is. My understanding is he's blind and deaf, and he gets seizures. He's unable to move his limbs. I mean, it's really unfortunate how he was born.
Yeah, it's awful, and I think one of the reasons, obviously it's a news story, but people aren't talking about it to the extent I think maybe people ought to, just because it is so hard to talk about. It's every parent's worst nightmare, and I think what it really is it's every parent's worst nightmare on top of every parent's other worst nightmares. You have just these awful things. The awful medical issues with the child, combined with, the sort of the hand of the state trying to prevent you as a parent from doing what you think you need to do to lessen your child's suffering and maybe to help them in whatever way you can. And importantly, the parents aren't unrealistic about this. They've told the media, look, if there's no option here but to end in the child passing away, that's fine. We can live with that, but we want to take him home. Put him in what can be his own crib. Give him a bath, and the courts in Europe wouldn't even let them do that. It's just an astonishingly heartbreaking story. And I think
humorously titled European Court for Human Rights, if I'm not mistaken.
Right. I don't know how something that's a national medical issue gets in front of a European court. I don't even know if I want to understand that, but that's really beside the point.
And it's England maybe where they just voted for Brexit. It's not like we're talking about Belgium here.
Yeah, Brexit faster, please. They should really just change the name of that tribunal to the death panel, because that is literally what it is in this case. And, there's obviously political points to be made here. There's also some non-political points. But, the most obvious political point is, how about an apology for Sarah Palin people,
right,
who was vilified years ago for warning correctly that the inevitable end result of socialized medicine was going to be death panels. And the left, feigning outrage and hyper-literalism is like, look at this bill, there's no death panel provision in the bill.
Right.
Well, that wasn't her point. The point she was making was an obvious one, manifestly true point, which is confirmed here, which is that if the government is providing health care to people, obviously the government is going to have to make rationing decisions. There's no way around that. And sometimes those decisions are going to have, seriously heartbreaking consequences. Now, obviously, if you have a free market system of health care, there's also rationing decisions that have to be made, but they're not made by, central authority or a tribunal. And I'm not even arguing that we need to have a free market system. That's an academic discussion that libertarian college students can have late one night over beer and pizza. That's besides the point. I'm just making objective descriptions here, not arguing for one system or another. But, in a market health insurance system, the care that you are entitled to receive is based on the care that you yourself have decided to contract for at the outset. Mm-hmm. You have a choice to say, I either want to spend a lot for insurance and get the best coverage that money can buy, or I want to spend a little bit for insurance and I'm willing to take, some more risk myself. And at least you have that choice. If you're the type of person that wants to be extra careful, that knows that, when it comes down to the wire, you'll regret not having insured against the risk, you have that option.
I want to clarify one thing. The decision by the European Tribunal is based not so much, if I'm understanding it correctly, on mercy, like, how can you make anyone live life this way? It's more of a cost thing, unless I'm mistaken there. Again, correct me if I don't have that right.
Yeah, well, that's my understanding as well, and obviously that's inevitable. But even if that weren't the case, even if it were just an issue of someone making a decision that there's no future quality of life for this child, and therefore the most humane thing we can do is end his life. I don't ever want to be in a situation where that decision gets made by a judge. Mm-hmm. Never, ever, ever. I want that decision, made by the people who love the child, who have an interest in achieving what's best for him, obviously in consultation with their doctors who are positioned to know the situation. I don't ever want that decision being made by a judge or a bureaucrat or a lawyer. I'm a lawyer. That is not the kind of decision that we are ever equipped to make.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what are the key lessons here? Well, actually, before we do that, I think we should talk about President Trump and his role in bringing this to attention. I mean, I don't think people would be talking about it to the same extent. Obviously, they're not talking about it the way they did Terry Schiavo a few years ago, but he did this with one tweet, and it shows the power of social media and the way things have changed, that the networks were forced to cover it now.
Yeah, and I was so happy to see him do that. And I think he did bring a lot of attention to it, and he offered to help, which was great. I hope he understands how much power he really has, though. As President of the United States, obviously he could send out a tweet and bring a ton of attention to this, which he did and was wonderful. But he also can call his staff in the room and say, by 2:00 tomorrow, I want a plan on my desk to bring this child over to the United States on Air Force One to give him, the best medical care in the world. And, to the best of my knowledge, he hasn't done that. But I think he could do that. It's in the power of his office. And, I hope as he, matures in office, he'll realize the kind of power he has and use it for good things like this.
You saw Nigel Farage spoke out about this, too. I don't know if you caught his comment.
I didn't catch that. But
Marco Rubio actually had good ones I sort of went the Sarah Palin route. He tweeted, media should ask protesters across the U.S. today why they support a system that leads to outcomes like this. I thought that was pretty interesting. That's kind of bold of Senator Rubio, I thought.
Yeah, absolutely. Good for him. And I said before, this is, obvious political implications for the debate over, how much government health care we want. And that's true. But I think that, there's also some less political stuff to be gotten out of this. Mm-hmm. This is a faceless bureaucracy, and it happens to be a government bureaucracy, but this kind of heartlessness can happen in any large bureaucracy. You know what it kind of reminds me of all things? It's two, totally random stories that don't really have an obvious connection, but I think there actually is a very strong connection. Mm-hmm. The incident a couple of months ago where the guy was roughed up getting kicked off a United Airline flight. What these two stories have in common is, both of these people are, interfacing with people at various levels of a hierarchy. In one case, the European Tribunal of Death Panels hierarchy, and the other case just, a typical large corporation. And at no point at any level in this hierarchy is there anybody who has, the job authority to engage in, one token act of kindness to the people they're dealing with.
Right.
They just, at no point did any of these people just have the authority or the wherewithal to say, okay, our policy says to do this, and look what I have in front of me. How can I make an exception to our policy here in order to do right by somebody? And it just didn't occur to anybody to ask themselves that question in both of these cases. And that, as I said before, is why I think this story exemplifies just one of the things that has gone so wrong in the world.
Just following orders, basically. Any final thoughts that you have, Keith, as I wrap up? This is my final interview of the week before I do Backlash Rewind tomorrow.
Yeah, well, that is about it. The only other thing I can add is just that it's the most devastating story imaginable, and I hope we all have some thoughts for the parents and the family. And the
you
child,
as a parent can probably relate better than I can. The worst nightmare any parents can experience, I would guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you see these newborn babies, I mean, they're young, they're precious, but they don't have mental faculties beyond what your dog or cat has when they're that age. But what they do have, and you can tell they have even very early on, is they have the ability to feel comfort and fear, and they know when they're around somebody who loves them, and that's really all this child deserves, is to have somebody who loves him, making the decisions for him, being with him, and that's exactly what he's being denied, and it's just the most awful story.
Great having you on, Keith.